So Dimitri's come here, invitation from the chairs, to talk about some of his work over the last 25 years in stereoscopic cinema, shooting 3D, live action 3D in particular. Oh, I should also say he's part of many award-winning contributions in 3D. So I shall, with that, hand over quickly to Demetri.
Good morning. I recorded a video and it's not coming up, so I'm just going to do this live. And it's probably better to do it live. I hope everyone can see me. Thanks. It's my first time joining the conference, and I'm here in Toronto in my basement office. And it's a unique situation, of course, because I would really prefer to be in a cinema and showing you some of the clips. I told Andrew I would look back at the last decade because it's certainly a good time with the cinemas closed for reflection. And this is a hard time for the industry, for the theatrical industry. It's a little terrifying for the theater and exhibition community. Our team is sort of hoping that we're developing projects and talking to filmmakers, and everything that I can do during this time to still bring attention to the art form as a craft and as an amazing sort of technological medium. And it's really been quite a journey the last decade to set aside what kind of artistry is going on and what kind of filmmakers have taken up multiple projects. I will give you a bit of background on myself. I started as a student of cinema and doing some writing. I started with music videos and Super 8 cameras. I'm really from the film era, actually. So sometimes I feel like a dinosaur, even though I'm chasing technology. So I was making music videos on 16mm film. I became a technician in the unions, in the IATSE, and that allowed me to go from my sort of creative and art background, and I did a lot of work in theater, and it allowed me to sort of get my head into cameras. And I really did that because of Stanley Kubrick, and I thought, in order to figure out this medium, you've got to figure out cameras. So it was in my journey of chasing technology and trying to learn to be a filmmaker and make short films that I was able to discover stereo. And that really happened for me around 2008, 2009, seriously, where I was actually given the chance to go to work and use phantom cameras, which were really tricky at the time. A lot of black balancing and a lot of delays on a film set. So I would say my introduction to stereo shooting was like a baptism by fire, and most people didn't like it. There was a really big pushback in the industry about bringing all this heavy tech onto the film set. The film industry, with a 100-year tradition, has some very sort of laid-in strategies about how they work, and even adding 3 people that are stereo people onto a film set provided a lot of challenges, and it made us, we had to have thick skin, and we were asking people to do more work, actually, more cameras, more cables, more footage. So I think sometimes people try and figure out how I made it work and how I'm still bringing this crew to directors. And I would say the most important thing is to smile, no matter how tricky something is. Smile, fix it, make it happen. And I've seen myself as a bit of a diplomat, and I've had to be a diplomat because when you're talking to a director who has the weight of a project on his shoulders and a cinematographer, you must give them confidence. And the great thing is the images speak for themselves, and as you move forward, you build on previous work and previous images, and certainly with technology, we build on that every time. We've been very fortunate to, well, I would say, coming out of Toronto, where I just expected to do television and small movies. In Canada, the movies tend to be smaller. I was very fortunate to do some stereo testing, and that testing allowed me to go to England and show Martin Scorsese really the first Alexa, the first digital setup for 3D. And the cameras were not actually ready. We pulled them out of very 4 months early to make that movie because Mr. Scorsese had agreed to do a digital movie with Arri, and he had researched stereo a lot. So that was sort of what broke me out of just working in Toronto and allowed me to bring some people from my team sort of to the big leagues. And so that was the big test, really. It was the test because the cameras were new and the systems were not new. They were from Avatar, from Vince Pace. They had done Tron. They had done some Resident Evil movies and Journey to the Center of the Earth. But the system was still evolving. And Hugo was sort of a special homage, a very sort of filmic homage. Hugo was the movie where I was actually able to identify with the director the role of the stereographer differently than the technician. And this was massive for me because the technicians will hide in the dark and make things happen. But Mr. Scorsese had grown up going to the stereo cinema. He had seen big, exciting 3D in the 1950s. And he sat me down beside him and he said, I need this to come out of the screen and I need this to do this. And so his film was more playful. The way he enjoyed 3D, the way it made him laugh every day when the dog's face was out of the screen, or when we would build up a certain scene knowing that we had a 3D moment. And also, and just the beauty that we're capturing. When you're in the capture department, you need something to capture. And, you know, when some people build such extraordinary, beautiful sets, it makes us look good too. So everything was at stake for me on that film. I certainly tried my hardest. I think that's where the gray hair started to come in. Now, having gone from that to working with someone like Jean-Pierre Jeunet, who I had studied in film class, Amélie and Delicatessen, Mr. Jeunet was a filmmaker already sort of working in 3D. I think this is important to say for cinema. Imaginary people, imaginations, they think in stereo, they block in depth, they light in depth, because in the 2D traditions, they've been working really hard to give a sense of immersion and give a sense of a big world. But what happens with stereo is that becomes instantly available, especially if you shoot natively with 3D monitors on set. So some of the traditions can relax a little bit, some of the backlighting, some of the separation, and then some of the stereo language and stereo filmmaking needs to come in where, for example, you shoot with a T8 like Citizen Kane, so we actually have focus and depth. And so the stereo language, when you're coming onto set with the 3D rigs, becomes shooting a stereo movie, which I've been very lucky to do. I would say there's another side to my industry where films are shot in 2D, and then there is a very large visual effects effort to convert material into stereo. And we've seen various results of that. I kind of think they're two different art forms. I've watched my friends doing conversion, and I've seen them grow. I've seen the theater space expand, and sort of the universe of the converted film has become much prettier, like Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars. So they've really sort of opened up their palette. I do think it's a different art form, and I do think it's a different stereo experience. And I know that in real stereo photography, I can have a shockingly realistic recognition, looking at old black and white photos from the Civil War and think that I'm on the battlefield. I use references like that before I start shooting a movie, because in those black and white early photos of stereoscopy, the images are very affecting, and they should guide the future photographers who are going to work in stereo, because I know there will be more. And I've encountered too many people who say, oh, this is new on a film set. This is new. Oh my God. And it's not new. And it's just a matter of me gently telling them it's not new. And the nicest thing we can do is we set up a screen and do dailies every night, and we've gotten into a habit of running a minute and a half from a classic film like Creature of the Black Lagoon or Alfred Hitchcock, and that sort of relaxes the crew in the first week of shooting. Everyone's like, oh yeah, 3D's been around for a while. That's kind of cool. Look, that looks kind of nice. And then people start working in 3D. They start imagining in 3D. They start thinking about the fabrics of the costumes in stereo. And then also the actors and the director really need to think about blocking in 3D and in a different space, the relationship to the camera. So that's important to me. Sometimes if we set up a scene and I can get it a little close to Dial M for Murder, I get really excited and I tell the director, you know, this is a little bit like Hitchcock here because we're not so tight and this is a medium wide shot and you're just letting the parlor play work. So I do like to bring in the theater references because I feel like the stereo cinema offers everybody the best seat in the house, and so it should. They're charging more for the ticket, so I think we have to make the effort to give everyone the best seat, and we can do that in stereoscopy by playing and manipulating the proximity to the actor or the content. And we have definitely done that with characters where we'll leave them deep in the film and have a discussion about the depth score and when that actor will present themselves out of the screen. And those moments have been very big and definitely had strong reactions from studios which are asking for a compromise. So they get scared making a 3D movie. And then I have to remind them they can watch the 2D because we're providing that out of the other lens at all times. They're getting their 2D movie. So we are not just stereo filmmakers. We are also creating the content down through every other version. So we're filmmakers, but the master format when I'm working on a native film is of course the stereo content. And for me, the biggest data bump for the brain, like I said, going back to old black and white photos, the biggest data bump is the stereo image itself. Although that leads me into the discussion of our journey with Ang Lee. And what we were dealing with 24 frames per second, and I think some of you are aware of the limitations and the discomfort. And I was aware of it as it was something that I had to be very careful of things close to the camera and close to the lens. So 24 for a stereo, as you know, is limiting for comfort, for a good physiological experience. So when we started testing high frame rates and we met Ang Lee, he had seen James Cameron's test at 60 and 48, and we were all well aware that the experience was changing massively at 60 frames per second after. So it's quite a step up from The Hobbit. And what we did is, and I give a lot of credit to my engineer for this, is record footage at 120 frames per second, from which mathematically it is easier to deliver all the versions that can be shown theatrically, 60 and 24, while still enjoying ourselves the 120 format. Now, that presents a lot of challenges because there at the time, there were no cinemas set up for 120 screenings for Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. But we did, for that film, get 5 cinemas in the world set up with 2 Christie projectors, so simultaneous 120. We had an out-of-the-box experience with Christie when we started filming Billy Lynn's Halftime Walks. And what I mean by that is we opened the laser projectors and Ang Lee snuck into the room. He wasn't supposed to be in the room, so we were in the process of calibrating them down to 14-foot Lamberts, but Ang Lee saw them full brightness at like 27, 28, and he said, oh my God, the footage looks amazing, so bright, so bright. And so he made a choice that his master and preferred viewing experience would be dual laser projection, 27, 28-foot Lamberts, extremely bright. He wanted to see every hair in the eyelash, every detail. And so that was our experience. We just filmed the entire movie at 120 frames per second. That involved a lot more lights on set. And it involved us building a lab in New York City. We had never done that before. to such an end. We had built labs and screening rooms going back to Hugo because it's important to watch your dailies on a screen if you're making a theatrical picture. So we've always done the projection screen, but at this point with Ang Lee, we were committed to delivering a film at a complete to deliveries, all the deliveries really to the studio, because we were the first people to do it. And it's also maybe somewhat more affordable. We were able to shoot in 50 days, a limited dramatic budget for some studios that to do a drama at 50 million and then to do 120 frames per second, 4K, 3D. That was kind of a little bit of a stressful challenge, but we like that apparently, and we don't mind the gray hair. So going forward, Billy Lynn being the sort of prototype example, we were fortunate to then make a film, Gemini Man with Jerry Bruckheimer, where it was an action picture where we were going to get a lot more screens set up at 120 frames per second. So that's our second picture. And we're much happier with also some of the exhibition rollout of that picture. For example, the Dolby Vision is 120 frames per second, which is one of my preferred for the HDR grading. I like the film very much. Ang Lee is very fortunate, and I think the 3D industry is fortunate in general with the technological support from Asia based on how many cinemas they're building, how the boom is going, and how they've embraced 3D. So I know they're still shooting and converting 3D in China for their theatrical market. And so they were very kind to get on board with Gemini Man to set up at least 50, if not 100 screenings of what Ang calls the full shebang, 120 frames per second stereo. And we're hoping that goes forward. What we now have to sort of ponder in this time as our cinemas are closed is how the cinema can be reinvented. And I would very much hope that the high frame rate 3D, sorry, would very much hope that the stereo, high frame rate, HDR, all of these quality offerings can be part of the recovery of our cinema industry after COVID. And I know it'll recover because everybody's missing sitting in the seats for that experience together. I'm just checking the time to see how we're doing. I'll do a few more minutes and then I'll take questions. I want to talk a little bit just more about artistry and merging coming. You know, it is a technological art form and it's very hard to quantify artistry in our business and to line up the technicians and things. But I think what the artistry is that I see even in Jean-Pierre Jeunet and certainly Ang Lee is courage. And courage in artistry is the ability to express yourself and not be afraid of criticisms and mistakes and to stand up and try things. Ang Lee said, Demetri, I don't really want to talk about your film Hugo because you guys used a digital camera and you made it look like cinema. And he said, you know, we're digital, we're 3D, high frame rate, HDR. Cinema doesn't have to always try to go into a DI session and make it look like a film emulsion. What we got to do is embrace the new digital aesthetic and sort of, so here we are, what traditions can we bring from the past and what are the new discoveries? What is the new digital future of cinema? I responded to somebody a few weeks ago who said cinema is only 24 frames per second. And I responded by saying, I think that's not a really smart statement to lock an artist into. Charlie Chaplin himself is on record talking about The Little Tramp, which I believe was 18 frames per second. And when they switched to sound, I believe they were pressuring Charlie to do the little character at 24. And I think that's a great artistry decision for Charlie Chaplin to work at 18 frames per second and say, no, the audience knows my character at 18. That's how he moves. He's jumpy. And that's part of the comedy. And so that's an artistry decision. So I think the frame rate is within the artistry. and we have to allow artists to sort of expand the possibilities and experiment. And for that reason, I am hopeful that I can see more students and young filmmakers doing high frame rate. I haven't seen a lot. I did see in Vancouver, Emily Carr, I saw dance footage at high frame rate, and that also helped inspire me with Realty to shoot some flamenco dancing with some true motion. So I shot a short that we played, I believe, last year with Tony Davis. And the real point about shooting high frame rate is the assets that we're delivering and what we can do with that. So because I had shot 120, what you have is, in essence, you can make a better movie at 24 because you have more control to blur the shutter in the background, to sharpen the eyes. So you're making synthetic shutters when you have more frames in all your lesser versions. And then, of course, my preferred thing is of course, to show you simultaneous 120 from 2 laser projectors. And I just need to find a way to make that happen. And every city, that's a bit of a journey and a proposition. But at this point, I've said to Ang Lee, do you mind if I put your 2 laser projectors on a truck and drive them around the country? I'd like to bring them to my country. Nobody in Canada has seen dual 120 projected. And I would like people to see how physiologically this is a significant difference than a 60 or a single projector 60. So that's part of really the ongoing work that we're doing. And it's a small group, but we're looking for support, and we're hoping to make another film in high frame rate. I do talk to people and tell them to bring it down and make it more simple. I would love to see like a dogma horror movie in your face. I'm fully aware of the criticisms that it's realistic. I won't accept soap opera because soap opera, I think, is its own thing from the past. And if they haven't seen 120, I don't want them to call a 60 single projector soap opera when we're making a 120 master. They really need to see what we're doing. Because it is super immersive and much more touching and effective. So I am hoping that we need other artists to try their own experiments, really. And I would like to see more very visceral, such as a war movie like Hurt Locker or something like that, where the audience will forgive us of our cameras and our intimacy. Right away, we need to be forgiven and just take somebody into the space and say, okay, you're on the truck, you're in the middle of the desert, and this is where we're going with this movie. Or you're talking to somebody who's talking directly to you, narrating a film, and you're with them on a journey. And so I'm hoping that happens. I keep encouraging people and looking for people willing to take that sort of a leap of faith. So I should wrap it up and open myself up for questions. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.